Hi, you guys. Welcome back. And of course, if you're new to this channel, welcome. My name is Tracy, and this is actually episode number 1 of the Mystical Moon series. So this episode is basically an introduction to our mystical moon. So stay tuned. I love the moon. I have always been a sky watcher, so someone who likes to look at the clouds and the stars and the sun and the moon. So the moon has always been just a big deal for me. But honestly, looking back, the moon has always captivated humanity since the dawn of time. So the moon is just full of this mystery, and it makes you wonder, kind of gives you the sense of curiosity. Sometimes the moon can make you feel romantic. But the moon is definitely powerful. It is powerful enough to control the tides, amongst other things. And there's just so much that the moon actually affects in our day-to-day lives that I wanted to make this series, the Mystical Moon series, so that we can learn a little more about the moon and how we can use those moon phases in our day-to-day life to simply make our lives easier, to make our lives flow better, and to help us to understand even our own personalities at different times during the moon's phases. So in this first episode of the Mystical Moon series, I'm going to just kind of go over the basics of our moon, just as kind of an icebreaker for future conversations throughout the Mystical Moon series. So I'm very excited to do this with you guys so that we can learn and grow together. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And it's also going to give us a lot of insight into ourselves as well, of course. But the moon throughout history has been known as the feminine principle. The sun is the aggressive masculine energy, and then the moon is that receptive feminine energy. So to start with the basics of our mystical moon, I want to just remind you all, or point out if you don't already know, that the moon doesn't actually produce its own light. The moon is simply reflecting the sunlight back to us. So the reason that we see different phases of the moon, growing from the new moon all the way up to the full moon, and then shrinking back down to that dark moon to new moon phase, that is proving that really all it is reflecting light. And the reason that it shows up in all these different sizes and shapes is because the Earth's shadow gets in the way of the moon. In 29.5 days, the moon makes its full cycle. So within that 29.5 days, you go from the new moon, a tiny sliver, and then it kind of grows all the way into full moon. And once the moon is full, then it begins to shrink down back to the new moon. So each and every time, each and every cycle is always the same. It never fails. The moon is constantly changing, but ever the same. So as the basics of the mystical moon, I just want to quickly go over the different phases of the moon. So we'll start with the new moon phase. This is a time where the moon is just a tiny little sliver up in the sky, and it's the smallest amount of moon that you can see. So it is the very first phase, the new moon. And so we start there, and then as the days go on, the moon begins to grow in appearance. We can actually see more light reflecting off of the face of the moon. So then we have the waxing moon. So waxing is when the moon begins at the new moon stage and then it appears to be growing in the sky. So as the moon is waxing, it's starting as a sliver and then it's just slowly growing bigger and bigger until finally we get to the next phase, which is the full moon phase. And that obviously is when the moon is full in the sky. You can see the entire face of the moon as it's all lit up and reflecting the sun's light back to us. And then, of course, we have the waning moon, which is after the moon is full, it begins to shrink back down. So that is when the moon is waning. It is shrinking back down. And then, of course, we have the dark moon, which is when there is no moon visible in the sky at all. So during the time of the dark moon, you have the sun, moon, earth. So the sunlight is hitting the moon on the side of the moon that the earth over here cannot see. Therefore, that is the time during the month when you see absolutely no moon. It's the dark moon phase. So now that you know that the earth is seeing the moon from different perspectives based on how the light is reflecting and how the shadow of the earth is appearing on the face of the moon, now I'll kind of go into some other phases that I also just kind of wanted to touch on briefly here. So one phase is called the supermoon. And so that is when the moon is actually closest to the earth within its orbit. And if that closeness is also corresponding with the full moon, that is what they call a supermoon, simply because it is a full moon and it's closer to the earth, so therefore it looks bigger than normal. And the next strange phase would be a mini moon, which is just the opposite of a supermoon. It's when the moon just happens to be the farthest away from the earth during its rotation. And therefore, if it's full, when it's on the farthest part of its rotation, it appears to be smaller in the sky. So that's what we call a mini moon. And then we have the blue moon. And a blue moon is a more rare occasion, which is, I mean, I'm sure many of you have heard that phrase, once in a blue moon, which basically means it does not happen frequently. It's a rare occurrence. But that's because a normal month has only one full moon. But a blue moon is when you get 2 full moons in 1 month. Now, this generally happens like every 3 years or so. So only once in a blue moon do we get to have a blue moon. And then, of course, we have the lunar eclipse. And the lunar eclipse is a magical event that happens where the sun and the earth are completely aligned, and then the moon passes through the earth's shadow. So those are just some of the other moon phases that we'll probably be discussing in more and better detail in future videos, but I just kind of wanted to briefly explain here for those of you who are curious about all the different phases of the moon. So the moon is a constant in our lives, even though it's constantly changing. But at least the cycle remains the same at 29.5 days each and every month. The impact on our lives is huge. The moon actually controls the tides with its gravitational pull. And that in turn alone just affects countless life forms upon the planet, including humans. If you think about it, our bodies are made, they say, of 70% water. So if our bodies are made of 70% water, and that water can be so easily manipulated by the moon's gravitational pull, then just think of what the moon can do for us, or to us if we don't work with it. I like to think of the word lunatic, for instance, where the word lunatic is actually stemming from the word luna, which means the moon. They say that people kind of go crazy when the moon is full, therefore calling them a lunatic. And also there are people who work in hospitals and labor and delivery, and they swear that there are more babies born under a full moon than at any other time of the month. So it's rather interesting, the more that you look into the moon and just the more that you turn your attention towards that beautiful orb in the sky, you'll begin to realize that as you work with the cycles of the moon, then the moon actually works with you. And that's really what I want us all to learn through this mystical moon series. It's just that hopefully over time, we can learn to be more in harmony with the moon and the moon's power. Every single thing has energy, and everything that is in your life affects your energy. So the moon is definitely a part of that as well. The moon definitely has an energy. There have been so many studies about our moon and the effects that it has on so many different aspects of our lives. So part of the Mystical Moon series is going to be talking about some of those experiments that I've come across that I want to share with you guys. And not only that, but I wanted to share with you what you can find out about your own personality based on what phase the moon was in when you were born, for instance. Because similar to your zodiac sign, the phase of the moon that you were born under also makes a difference in your personality and character traits and things like that. So now you know just kind of the basics about the moon phases, but on episode number 2 of the Mystical Moon series, I'm going to dive even deeper into those moon phases, and we're even going to discuss how those moon phases can affect you and your personality based on what phase the moon was in at the time that you were born. So be sure to check that one out, you guys. I'm so excited to do that video.